What's going on, workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
Hey, Chris. We're going to be talking today about obviously the league survey from Activision Blizzard regarding WoW and Final Fantasy. That's going to be the main topic. But there's a special shout out. A friend of the channel, Glenn Angel, has did a special collab. Why don't you tell everybody about that?
Yeah, Billie Jean King, an icon in the movement for kind of equal rights and things like that. Taking tennis as her platform. Great movies and documentaries and all around, and she's got a book coming out and all that. And so for her to sit down and spend time with Glenn was pretty incredible. It's a good listen. I encourage you to go over and hit follow on that lovely Twitch channel and go give that a listen. I think the VOD's still up. It was put on by Adidas, so I don't really know what the rules are, how they're like making that VOD available. Because Adidas kind of sponsored that whole thing to make that possible.
Either way, we'll have Glenn Angel's his Twitch link in the description of this video. You can go check that out. So I saw that he tweeted that. I was like, oh, that's so cool. So incredible. Anyway, that's very exciting to see that kind of engagement on another Final Fantasy XIV creators content. So anyway, well done. Let's dive into today's topic. Obviously, I got this into my feed because Asmongold was reacting to the survey itself. But beyond, I guess, his influence on this channel, apparently, I wanted to talk to you about it. Activision asking our players, is their community going to be playing Endwalker? And if this is true, because let's put some shade on it, it could just be something completely doctored. I don't know whether or not it is confirmed fact or not, but let's just take it at face value, as the internet can make things up from time to time. And the thing that I found most interesting is it's just a one-question survey. It wasn't asking if they're going to be playing New World. It wasn't asking if they're playing like Guild Wars 2.
True.
Go ahead.
Did you see the bottom of the survey where it said survey portion complete 20%? There are other questions in that survey. I don't know if those are other games. Right there on the tweet. I don't know if you've ever quit WoW before, but as somebody that's quit WoW before, I believe you've unsubscribed. Yeah. It has asked me if I'm quitting to play another game. In the past, as far as I remember, because I've only quit a couple of times, I've only unsubscribed a couple of times, but my exit survey has had a blank. If you were quitting to play another game, what is that blank? And for them to instead say, hey, here are the games that we're really interested in knowing. Is there something that game's doing better than us? Yes, Final Fantasy should be in that list. I want to immediately, right from the get-go, dial this whole thing down from 11 to like a volume that we can all have like a conversation about.
I think it's great that regardless that they're asking these kind of surveys, I don't think I've ever been prompted when I unsubscribed from WoW if I was going to go play another game specifically. I did mark that, but I wasn't asked what specific game. So maybe it's just a kind of a random sampling or based off of how long people play. I'm not sure. It doesn't really bother me one way or the other, but I think it's really great. Yoshi P, let's just focus on the 14 side of this as a thing. He has a whole team. He has a team dedicated to what other MMOs are doing, both current market ones and the things that are coming in the future. Like if you told him about Ashes of Creation, I don't know if he's an expert, but he's been informed about what they're attempting to do and what they're trying to do. He has a team dedicated to that because you don't want to sit here and get blindsided, especially as 14 is climbing and climbing in the rankings today. So while asking this question is, I think, A, obvious, B, important because they have a lot of players that play 14 on the WoW dev side. We've talked to them in the past, and if that's becoming more and more a thing, like, why not learn from, that's what competition, like 14 being a strong game, WoW being a strong game, like, the players win. If you have a preference, guess what? Hopefully your game gets better because somebody else is punching, pretty hard in this case.
Yeah, I think it's really logical. A lot of times people like to associate words with devs, that they're these passionate artists doing what they want. But having a team research your competition and report to you on a regular basis is just good business.
Yeah.
Like that's a logical, forward-thinking plan. That is not... He said specifically on the games that he already doesn't have time for. He knows about the games he has time for, but he's like, no, I don't just need to know about the games I like. I need to know about what's going on in the whole space. And that is more than me and my dev team can get to. So we're going to have people on the team whose sole job is to go out there, just like somebody who works for Kotaku and IGN, and be well-versed in the space, whether they like the game or not, and come back and try to report objectively, here's what they're doing well, here's what they're doing poorly, here's what they're trying that's new, here's what to keep an eye on. As both things we may want to implement and things we may want to avoid in these other games. And that's not just the other big ones. A lot of times innovation comes out of these new players trying to break the mold. And so paying attention to them is a really good plan too. It's World of Warcraft does a piss poor job letting us know what's going on behind closed doors. And so all we're left with is perception.
What's really powerful about that statement to me is that Chris and I spend hours and hours and hours covering a game that is not in our native language. And because of the power of this community, I honestly feel like we both get interviews, we get the live letters, which get live translated, which essentially is this information that we know is a steady clip. And the Chris to say that about WoW, a massive company that speaks our native language that's only 2 hours behind us in terms of time zone, and to not have that kind of information, I think is a powerful statement. Continue your thought, Chris. I just wanted to highlight
I have played games with people that work at Blizzard. How would I interact with the majority of people who work on Final Fantasy if they literally don't even play on the same data center as me and speak the same language as me? Like, this is home turf. North America is home turf. Now, Yoshi P has made it abundantly clear in recent interviews when people asked, well, what do you think about being a Japanese dev? And he's like, no. We are a worldwide dev. We develop for a worldwide audience. So he does not view that as a gap that is there intentionally, but it is geographically and time zone wise there. Yeah. Covering live letters as North Americans. When people are like, well, you guys just do this because, you don't do this because you want to. Who wakes up at 3 a.m. because they don't want to? Like, that sounds awful.
Yeah.
Gosh, I hope people don't have to do that on a sustained basis. We wake up because we want to hear what's going on. And so, like, live letters regularly fall at awful hours for us.
With rare
that's just
exception.
the nature of time.
With rare exception.
But WoW, I don't have to wake up really hard for live letters because they just don't have them. Like, we don't have these regular, they've tried them in the past at these brief intervals. But with Final Fantasy, I get 2 for every single patch. And I get 5 patches every single expansion. So that is 10 times that they're going to do a video thing at a minimum before you talk about anniversary events at things like E3, other panels, Q&As, written interviews, all of this other stuff. That is the minimum before the 3 fan fests, before the media tours. That is the minimum 10 points of contact. And so World of Warcraft chooses not to do that. And so as the public, we have to take these little crumbs and we have to piece together our own version of reality, whether or not that's real. And so all we hear this week is that there was one slide on one survey that asked if people were playing 14 and that Bobby Kotick is going to be doing just fine in 2021. That's all we know. And so if they want us to have any more empathy or sympathy than the fact that they're aware that Endwalker is coming, they've got to tell us.
Yeah. And how do they, how do they go about doing that? Because all the information that I see is wrapped up in drama, in the hot take. I think it takes a serious amount of focus, and how I view it is that when you look at, let's say, a resource like trust, 1.0 with 14 lost the player's trust, and Yoshi P has put in time and effort and built that back up, and I think is continuing to deposit trust within the player base. WoW, I think, did that at a point, and then over the course, and this is my perception, if I just look at YouTube and Reddit as kind of my sources, right? Like, there is obviously a bias leaning in terms of content creation and what the actual reality of the situation is.
Those guys are awesome.
But I see that as a continually withdrawing of that trust. They continue, like the devs haven't really put out much that informs that early trust, because even when you look at BFA had people were like, this is amazing, and then it's like the bottom fell out quickly thereafter. Shadowlands, I think Shadowlands fixed a lot of the issues that people had with BFA, but then they just didn't deliver content. Like, it's, and where I would look at 14, and especially as a team and how they communicate, is that when they make mistakes, they don't seem to repeat those mistakes. It's usually a different style of mistake. And that's something that you got to experience first and foremost at a fan fest, where having me been to every one was like, oh man, at the first one, this was a real problem. Guess what? They fixed that. But at the second one, they fixed it, but there's a new issue. Well, it turns out the third one, they fixed that problem. And the issue is this thing. And so then each and every time they've improved upon it. Same thing that's why Shadowbringers felt like it had the strongest expansion launch, where in Stormblood you have things like Raban Extreme. So there's this sense that, we got it wrong, and here's how we go about it. And I think the core of that is communication. Yoshi P and the team, when Raban Extreme was happening, they said, here's the problem. It's not a light switch fix, unfortunately. We're going to have to work on it and do some adjustments. And they did. And it was nice to see that those things had already been taken into account when Shadowbringers launched. So I don't know what Blizzard does, because when
both of these games are heavy into marketing too.
Yeah.
So like the marketing is very careful around everything you just described.
Mm-hmm.
The perception around that.
Oh,
like right now, Square Enix is paying World of Warcraft streamers in what seems to be a handful per day as some sort of like, let's make sure there's a WoW streamer every single day on Twitch.
Following the Phil Spencer kind of.
Meanwhile, World of Warcraft is trying to schedule strategic dates on patches, because if they're going to be late, they might as well be at a strategic advantage time.
Yeah.
They're running surveys to say, hey, are you going to 14? I assume after that slide, if you are going to 14, there's a follow-up question. Whatever game it is, New World or anything. What is it about that game? And maybe it's multiple choice. Is it that it's new? Is it that it's different? Is it that it's doing something better? If so, please elaborate. Like, I don't know. I didn't get that survey. So like, I would assume if you want a good survey, if you want to be able to take the actions you just described, if you want to be able to take these actions and you want to be able to hit on the right stride every single thing, then doesn't this survey, if anything, tell us that World of Warcraft at least likes the idea of being able to do what you just described 14 doing?
Yeah, I think that they have to look at, if 14 is their toe-to-toe competition, that what is it about 14 that's appealing, and can they then do that? Or is this something where within game development, asking that question today isn't a tomorrow fix, it's a 2 years from now fix, right? So when you start asking the questions, it's like, is this something that's going to impact their next expansion? Or if they're working on something massive, who knows? Like nothing's been publicly said, etc. So it's like, that's something where I think when Yoshi P did a survey and surveyed the player base of 1.0, that's what we got into 2.0. That's what we got a year and a half later, because these things take time and it takes that energy and that leadership. And the nice thing with Yoshi P is that he said, okay, cool. We have WoW as a model. Okay, great. All right, we're not going to have to take everything. Some of the things that he had to take are still things that people complain about in the game today. When we look at like classes and the jobs and how some of the structure ends up functioning, like there's these relics of 1.0 still slightly in there. They've been slowly chipping away at those overall, but that's another topic for another video. I do want to kind of pivot and focus the survey question on what we know is coming up with WoW and what impact it could have on 14, which is we do have a date for 9.1. That is June the 29th. That is actually, I was like, oh man, I don't know how much of that was a response to the swelling of, like the Pro 14 movement within the WoW community, or if that's something where, if they looking forward to Endwalker as some way of like, well, if 9.2 is going to be staged out at some time in November, if they can actually get that kind of turnaround going forward, like, is this a strategic thing? Because WoW has done that time and time again in terms of putting out their biggest, patches, usually against competition launching big activities. Go ahead.
I think during Shadowlands, they've proven, if anything, they are far from nimble. And so I don't think they're in a position to like, I think they're just trying to get the patch out. Yeah. We've had it in PTR. It should have been here 3 months ago. So to say like, they picked June 29th over July, whatever, over August, over earlier in June. At this point, from my opinion, like, I don't really think that the meeting should be about like, hey, should we delay it? Wouldn't that be fun? Like,
right.
No, just get it out the door. When? I don't know, 3 months ago. Now, like, is it ready? Like, if you're asking me if you should slow down, the answer is no. Right. Get it out the door. We are losing people by the day, rightfully so. And so, like, I don't think June 29th is that strategic.
The question is,
the strategic date was in like
slow down.
March.
Is that, did they decide to cut something? Did they decide to cut something so they could hit June, as opposed to, because if all of a sudden you wait a week, well, guess what? That's 4th of July. People are on holiday. Like, do you wait a week after that? So June 29th seems reasonable. I know the concern was August, but there's also a big game launching in August.
My concern with June 29th is it's too soon. Not because it's too soon since Shadowlands dropped. That is not by any stretch true. It's that everything I've heard about the PTR is that, like, everything people have an issue with, they go, oh, well, you're not seeing the complete version. And so they're out there. So like, this thing's just going live, man.
Yeah.
Like they got 10% of it built and they're like, well, it'll be ready in 14 days. What? So like, because I think there's still things hitting the PTR right now. There's no
Yeah.
way they can turn around feedback based on those things.
Right.
I don't even know why you'd push out functionality right now. Like, that's insane. Fido in chat saying functionality pushed to PTR yesterday. Why?
It's dangerous.
How can that help you?
Dangerous.
Like, that's insane.
I went on vacation, so I was off for a week. We pre-filmed some of those videos. That's like how we try to do it here. But I had a client that was like, hey, can you push out this update to the server? And I'm like, I'm not available until Monday. I'm not going to put out code that has you calling
Even
me.
if you are, you're going to have to process what the feedback was, decide an action plan, implement that action plan, implement it into the code, make sure that didn't trigger something new. That's not something that you do with 7 days to go. Okay, so then to pivot that, what is so historically, WoW patches have always been somewhere between, I don't know if there's ever been a WoW patch faster than 70 days after a previous patch. So I think that's your minimum. I think 10 weeks would be shorter than any WoW interval that I know of. And the longest is way longer than it should be.
Yeah.
So WoD only had 2. And one of them didn't have a raid. Like, one of them is not considered a patch by many people.
Right.
So you've got a range in which WoW has decided to operate. If 9.2 is somehow, if all these delays were COVID related, and so Final Fantasy had COVID delays of 2 months, and then after that 2 months had passed, that was a one-time cost, and every patch after that has been relatively on time. Now they've had to trim things from the total size of those patches to keep them on time, but they have kept the interval relatively on pace.
Right.
So we're just seeing that 2 months ripple out into what I assume we just move into all of time is 2 months late forever, because I don't see how they close it up. But maybe sometime, and maybe 6.1 comes out quick. I don't know. It doesn't matter. WoW has a much longer time, but assuming it's once again a one-time cost and everything after that is just kicked out by 8 months or whatever forever, 9.2 could be right around the corner. 70 days to eternity being our range. It is possible 9.2 tries to rival Endwalker. Now, based on them saying 9.1 took this long, I don't see how that's like based in reality. But let's assume for a moment they want to put 9.2 against Endwalker. How in the world do you take on an expansion that comes off of a good expansion going into the finale of 10 years of story? What does 9.2, so like they're asking in this survey, but like, what is the actionable thing? If people go, hey, I'm going to Final Fantasy because they have like literally an award-winning expansion. They have a huge free trial, critically acclaimed, and they are going into an expansion that is opening up with narratively the finale of 10 years of buildup and will be beginning something new in 6.1. Like if you're dating a girl in college and you don't call her a few times, and so she doesn't go out with you again, and you run into her and you're like, we should really go out again. She's like, yeah, but I'm actually seeing somebody else right now. And he calls, and he's handsome, funny, more attentive, is a billionaire. Like, at what point do you go, okay, so I've taken in that feedback and there is nothing actionable here.
Right.
Like, he's better than me in every way. So I don't know how the survey at this point helps them, but I appreciate that they put one out there.
It's good for information for them to be aware of, right? You know, It's like, hey, because of the other things that are happening on as well. Because what I found interesting, obviously the focus on 14, but WoW has some big competition starting to heat up. And I think essentially, and this is just me kind of projecting myself into the situation, same thing as we've talked about, how I believe Yoshi P's working on something massive for Final Fantasy XIV. And, you know, is 7.0 that payoff? I don't know, but that seems like a reasonable, expectation, maybe. WoW in that same regards is like, hey, are we looking at something bigger? We're talking about games that aren't, 2 years old. We're talking about 10 plus years old. And in a couple years, that's starting to eke up on that 15 year. Final Fantasy XI next year is going to celebrate its 20th year. In production, in development, in live. And so, like, at the end of the day, from the live service model, and this is going to be our video for tomorrow, we're going to be talking about Phantasy Star Online 2 impressions and more. But there's a sense of, like, how does this industry, how does this model, how does this genre evolve over the course of time that both is, good and what the players enjoy, or is the option that eventually you just kind of have to accept that, okay, we just can't do what we want to do anymore, and we're just going to let this kind of ride into the sunset. I don't think WoW, if I was Activision, especially with how they love, to make money, would want that for one of their biggest titles. The question is like, what's the plan going forward? And honestly, I think that's why this survey exists, because if you're sitting here saying, hey, we're going to do something in a couple of years that people are really going to be excited about, let's see what everybody else is doing, and let's learn from the really cool things that people like, and then let's learn from the things that didn't work out,
Yeah. So here in the U.S., anybody who follows the United States, we get along politically as a country just perfectly. Everybody's just 100% in sync, and we're just nailing it.
We are pretty well in sync outside of Twitter.
but every once in a while, let's say there's like a minor disagreement between two sides of something. Somebody will be very frustrated when a candidate reaches across the side and softens their views on something. And they say, a few videos ago, we used the example pickles, and they say, hey, I'm very anti-pickle, but you know what? I've been listening to the other side who's like puts pickles on everything, ice cream, waffles, you name it. And I'm realizing maybe pickles should be more of a personal choice, and we can meet in the middle. And it can just be like, hey, pickles aren't forced on everything, but pickles aren't anti. Yeah. And we can meet, and people get really frustrated sometimes. They're like, well, they're just changing their views to represent me. That's their job. So as long as they vote for what they said they vote, like there's no problem with that in my mind. So when gaming companies say, hey, we want information to help us better understand what the people playing our games want, I don't see how this whole thing blew up to be such a story. Blew up to be such a thing that I don't see this as a bad thing at all. Both WoW and 14 are better if the devs are aware of what the other one's doing.
100%.
And not only what each other are doing, what Guild Wars is doing, what ESO is doing, what Old Republic is doing, what these new ones with New Genesis being in a new engine, and Blue Protocol coming online, and New World coming online. And like the list goes on and on and on and on. Like, please know what other people like about those games. You don't need to be a game that satisfies all people, but you do need to be the best game that satisfies the group of people you're hoping play your game. And those people don't live in a bubble. And so without making yourself some bland one size fits all game, it's nice to know, especially with little things like UI or server structure or patch rollout or communication, where like it's not necessarily genre specific. The way Yoshi Pete communicates with the community is valued by us, and that should be true of every gaming company.
Yeah, I wish it was. Chat's asking about, honestly surprised 14 wasn't renamed Final Fantasy Online when it launched ARR, and that's the topic that we've kind of teased around with when we talk about 7.0, 17. Yoshi P's even said that at some point the number might not make sense, but...
He used 20 as his example.
Yeah, he used 20 as his example, but he also said we were going to the moon in 7.0, maybe. So like maybe there's an elevated timetable. We're not going to talk about that live with you guys because that literally could be very spoiler sensitive. But note that we are looking at doing a video like that.
There's reasons not to do it.
Right.
All these SEO tags and stuff, they built up a huge brand with Final Fantasy XIV.
Yeah. So there's, it'll be an interesting subject. So hopefully you guys look for that. Subscribe, like, favorite, share, clip, whatever. Do your thing, social media style. We really appreciate all the support. We'll wrap up this video because we need to talk Phantasy Star Online 2. And then Chris might be streaming, might not. Just depends on how much concrete is being drilled into his head while filming this. So guys, for Work to Game, my name's Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thanks for watching. Hopefully you have a fantastic day, and hopefully we'll see you next time. But until then,
take care.